You're listening to Product-Led Revenue, brought to you by Correlated. In each episode, you'll hear first-hand advice and tactics from SaaS, sales, and revenue leaders about using product signals to drive expansion and revenue growth. Let's jump in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Product-Led Revenue. I'm Breezy Beaumont, and this episode is brought to you by Correlated, a customer expansion platform for B2B software companies that focus on product-led growth. So today, our guest is Steeve Vakeeswaran, Head of Sales and Expansion at Zapier. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so to give our audience some background on yourself, can you tell us about your role at Zapier?
Yeah, so my role at Zapier was to stand up our sales assist function initially, which is a small but burgeoning team. And our job is to help and guide customers through their buying process and ultimately onboard them onto Zapier. I also oversee the account management function, as well as the corresponding sales/RevOps function that helps lay down the plumbing and infrastructure for these motions to scale.
Awesome. And you were also previously at Shopify. So let's talk a little bit about that role there since it goes kind of in the timeline of things.
Yeah, for sure. So started off my time initially at Shopify. Part of Shopify Plus, was part of the early first 50 there. And our role was really to help support the launch Plus, which is our mid-market business. And that was pretty interesting. That was a pretty interesting time for Shopify because it was a business that had gone fully product and had started to layer on sales, account management, launch management, and all of those functions for the very first time in their efforts to market. So my role there was really to be one of the first people to start the biz ops team and worked on all things pricing and packaging, go-to-market ops, merchant success operations, new product launches, and the whole 9 yards there.
Nice. So just a couple of small projects, really nothing, major that could impact the business. I'm totally messing.
I tell people. Yeah, anything and everything under the sun, including brand coffee, donuts.
That's great. That's great. A lot of ownership over there. All right. So for anybody listening, before we get too far into Zapier and just start getting into the nitty gritty here, let's give them some background for anybody who's listening who maybe hasn't heard of you all yet, which would be hard, but let's give them some background.
Yeah, for sure. So Zapier is an automation platform. And what we do is we move information from one space to another. And our goal is really to make all the menial tasks in your life easier by automating them. So we have over 5,000 different applications that have built integrations on top of Zapier. We've been around for close to 10 years now. And we have people building and using Zapier in such interesting and scalable ways. Everything from automated text notifications before a Zoom meeting is about to start to building out really robust companies and businesses on top of our platform. Just as an example, last year, Zapier was used in many different ways to help power some of the COVID workflows and vaccine distribution efforts. So we've got people building all sorts of crazy things on our platform.
It's really interesting. There are so many different use cases. I've even seen a lot of the different ways that at various companies I've worked for, how we've kind of used this vastly different format. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. Tell me about Zapier in the early days. Were you always product-led? Was there always a sales team? What did that look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I joined Zapier in 2020. And prior to that, Zapier close to 8 years. And in those 8 years, Zapier was 100% self-serve. Really proud ourselves of being self-serve first, really thinking about the customer journey, really helping solve for the scale of self-serve. Part of my role in 2020 was to figure out the launch of this new product, which is Zapier for Companies. It's one of our products that is designed for scaling teams and scaling kind of organizations that want to use Zapier. And in looking at some of the funnel data from the self-serve side, we saw that there were different drop-off points that were just confusing. We were trying so many different nudges and product onboarding efforts and marketing efforts. And no matter what, we really couldn't move some of these like core kind of metrics here and really onboard more users. And that's when kind of the concept of sales assist started at Zapier. And I became our first sales assist rep and started injecting myself wherever I thought there was friction really between the customer and our product and our onboarding process, and really tried to use that as an educational piece and ultimately drive the conversion.
Awesome. And what's that look like? So did you get a demo button, so to speak, on the website? What's kind of the back and forth between people signing up to use the product naturally and sales sort of getting involved there?
Yeah, 100%. So we had a couple principles right from the get-go. Number one, rather than converting a number of customers, we wanted to understand why they were blocked with the self-serve file, right? We wanted to understand what was really lacking for them in that area. So we did a myriad of different research studies, but also the best way to do that is to interject a human in the loop and say, hey, how can I just help you? I'm just here. Talk to me. Let me know how I can help you. So we did that by offering both the self-serve option and get a demo option on a pricing page and on our landing pages wherever possible. So we would never restrict anyone from self-serving if that's what they want to do. In fact, we encouraged that. That meant that our system was working and our entire motion was working. Rather, if you ever got stuck at any point, you always had a human that you could talk to that was going to reach out to you in a couple hours. Once we started running that motion, we started seeing a whole different array of learnings, really, about our customer, about why they were trying to speak to us. Everything from, hey, I love the product. I have no questions about the product. I just need some centralized billing efforts. Can you talk to me and help me out with that? To, hey, I'm sold on the product, but I actually just need some help answering some questions around security reviews. Can you do that for me? To, hey, I think I understand the product, but I need your help inspiring deeper use cases for me. Can you help me figure that part out? Or, hey, I came from one of your, 4,000 partners and they told me to come to you. I don't know anything about your product. Give me a quick overview on how we can help. So we started feeling so many different questions there. And as you can imagine, it was just such rich context that we pass on to both the product and marketing orders and say, hey, maybe these are the types of questions we should be answering in some of our kind of content and more scalable channels of efforts. So that's how that started there. And it's been really, really, really exciting. I think we've been seeing a lot of growth with that single motion. We're also experimenting with a couple other motions that are less reactive and hand raiser in nature and more proactive in nature. And I'm pretty excited to see how these results will come out.
So you start in 2020 and you start to build this sales assist motion. Bring me up to speed on where's the team today? How have you thought about building out the different functions across the team and sort of what those roles look like?
Yeah, 100%. So, firstly, expert shout out to Wade, Steve, and a couple other folks, because starting to experiment with the human touch motion at a company where you've been fully self-serve, before you do a single thing, I think there's got to be strong buy to experiment with these motions. And fortunately, we were willing to experiment. We've always been progressing in some part thinking there, and that's been super helpful. The first thing we did was we just started to build things brick by brick and started to solve problem by problem. So the first thing for us was getting a bunch of reps in seat and starting to think for and solving that in terms of the efficiency and tracking the learnings and doing all of the results tracking of the motions that I just told you about. Eventually, over time, we realized that we needed some help here. We needed help in terms of we needed to track this in the CRM. We needed analytics help. We needed workflow help and automation help. And that led us to then invest in sales ops and rev ops and a couple of other supporting kind of roles there. And over time, we started to say, okay, well, if we can do this at the pre-sale level, we should be able to also influence positive change and positive growth post-sale, specifically, 12 months later, right? Are they actually renewing with Zapier? Have we seen a meaningful uptick in usage? And can we actually influence some of those motions and help them really grow with our platform? So we said, okay, let's spin up an account management team earlier this year, which is fairly nascent, fairly new. We're still developing some of the playbooks around that.
What's the split for you all between what sales owns, what customer success owns? And maybe when I say that, I'm sure there's like a co-ownership, but what's the compensation like with that type of ownership?
Compensation around.
Yeah, like what is the compensation ownership for sales activities versus CS activities? So who owns expansion?
Yeah.
Who owns the, all these different pieces?
Sure. Yeah, so it's still something that we're still experimenting with internally, full answer. We don't have a good kind of solid answer here. But one of the things that I can answer is I think when you get started, this actually segues into the type of role that you want to hire for this aspect. One of the first things that we had to make a decision on was, do you have fully salaried individuals that are in this role? Do you have base salary plus a variable component to this role? And then once you make that decision of like, okay, A or B here, then you start to think about, okay, well, what's the profile of this role? Like, who do we really want in this role? I mean, it has sales in its title, but do we want maybe an Oracle rep or a Salesforce rep, or do you want maybe someone else? So what we found to be really successful here is we found Number one, for folks to be fully salaried, at least at this point in basic kind of setting this functionality. One, it helps because it reduces a lot of the pressure and incentives to just shove a bunch of deals through without actually understanding why we're actually meaningfully improving the customer journey. So that was the first thing that was really important for us. The second, I think there's about three attributes that you got to look for in this role. Number one is you got to look for people that have a passion for experimentation and growth efforts. Typically what we found is a lot of our team, they've either built something in the past, they've been founders in the past, they've come from agency backgrounds in the past. They've really just shown a really high degree of agency and resourcefulness. And I think that's really important. Number two, they've got to have a passion for a technical product in our case. The products that we sell, they're all about API calls and triggers and actions. And if this could make sense, that's something that we really want. And the third is, I think you have to have a high degree of customer empathy and almost like a customer success profile in a sales role, especially for a product like ours that's usage-based, right? Getting someone through the door for us is a great land strategy, but most of our revenue growth and usage growth and value for the customer comes from an increased usage on the back end. So really the job to be done from a sales conversation is not really selling them on a particular platform, but it's really, hey, can I empower you? Can I help educate you or inspire you of all the different things that you can build on that platform? And then reduce the inertia of not doing anything and actually like push you along the pathway and say, hey, here's how we can do this, right? Like, here's how we can help support you build this. Here's how we can help kind of inspire you. Here's some content around it. Here's an introduction to an expert. So you have to have that kind of customer success, customer empathy mindset in that sales role.
It's so funny. I talk a lot and talk to others about this kind of blurring line between sales and customer success. And I think it's sometimes about what the role of the two is, but I think a lot of the time what we're really getting at when we talk about that is the core of salespeople in product-led orgs just have to have more of a customer success mindset. Like that's really at the end of the day, your goal is adding value and they might already be users of your product. So that's a totally different sales experience if you haven't been in product-led before. I think we're definitely on the same page there. And that makes sense that that's something that you all have built into your hiring structure as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So can you walk me through the process you all have for converting and expanding accounts and users? Inside of that, what types of data are you looking at? How is the team kind of finding those opportunities today?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think this trips a lot of people up. And it's, we've definitely iterated and experimented with a bunch of different answers to this question. But I think what's really important here is answering, what is the atomic value that you're trying to measure and really move the needle on at each stage of the customer function. So at Shopify, our entire business it was an MOR business. And our goal was, hey, could we actually move folks from a plan that was, say, a $299 Shopify Advanced plan over to Shopify Plus, which is a platform designed to scale with your growth. And that came with variable payments pricing. And it was a really profitable motion for us. So when you think about that motion there, you would think a lot about, okay, well, what's the cost of the expansion revenue or the difference that you could get by moving them up market? What is the maximum cost you're willing to pay for that? And really designing to build motions that can farm your user base through that. At Zapier, one of the things that we've realized is we're a usage-based company. We also have plans. So for us early on, we said, okay, well, let's focus on getting folks into the right plan. It doesn't matter which plan it is, but let's just focus on getting them into the right plan. So we'd say, okay, well, we look at previous usage patterns and we look at previous kind of demographic, firmographic, and also product details and usage patterns to really identify what we do. For example, we take a look at an account and say, hey, you've got maybe 7 to 10 different people at Zapier, at your company using Zapier. An IT person, because we can see job role in our user database. And it looks like you're consistently hitting your cap in terms of task usage. That's forcing you to upgrade to the next task here. And we'd say, that's an aha moment for us to have a kind of sales assist conversation, because now we're proactively reaching out and we're saying, hey, look, you're hitting your cap. You're going to go upgrade anyways. You already have 11 people in your account. Why not consolidate all of these folks under a centralized instance and let us show you and educate you on the value of collaboration, teams and folders and shared folders and all of that stuff. So that was a motion that we tried that worked a ton. Second thing we tried is we'd say, okay, well, if you're a company coming in and you're a tech-enabled business over a certain employee size, there's a high degree, if you're in kind of the enterprise SaaS space or kind of a space of business like ours, you'd say, okay, well, user controls and single sign-on and things like that become ultra important. That's here if you're going through SOC 2 certification, becomes almost certain that you need to be. So that's an interesting moment for us to say, okay, let's interject with sales talent and say, hey, let's help you get on that right plan and set you up with that right plan. So for us, it was really around figuring out what is the atomic value that you want at each stage and helping that. Post-sale, completely different playbook, but it's also important to understand that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And where were these insights coming from? Did you have a team? I know you mentioned sales ops earlier. Did you have a team helping to kind of pull these into your CRM or into a dashboard for you? Or how are you kind of taking action on those today?
Yeah, we have a really robust marketing team, a marketing ops team, a product team, as well as a data engineering team here at Zapier. And fortunately, when we got started, we were really able to use a lot of their insights, as well as our head of biz ops, Steve Vakeeswaran, his insights to really find these clusters. When you're starting, you're using tools like Looker. And then eventually we went from Looker to let's get these tools into HubSpot CRM. And as you go on, you start to kind of evolve your tech stack and start to look for more robust solutions there. But when you're first starting out, it's really up with like a Google Sheet. If you're lucky, a Looker dashboard that's dynamic, and you've got a couple pivot tables and a couple cells that say, yeah, I'm contacted, it's worked here or not. And eventually we scale over time. Now we've built out like good tracking in our data warehouse to be able to measure these.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's on par with what we hear from a lot of folks when we're talking to them over at Correlated as well. I mean, there's a lot of people doing exactly what you talked about, right? Maybe they're using reverse ETL and piping things into their CRM. Maybe they're using Looker, Tableau, or something like that to sort of surface some of these insights. I mean, honestly, all of it's better than nothing. It can be a little bit hard to be actionable, but I think there's definitely stages where that can be sort of check the box. It's good enough and it's getting the job done for us today. And then as we kind of move down the line and as
Yeah.
needs evolve, like you already talked about, kind of the needs internally evolving in some ways. I guess for future state, I don't know, and I don't know if this is something you've been actively thinking about, but future state, what would an ideal setup be for the team, or what would maybe be better enablement for them?
Yeah, I mean, hey, like we're still learning, right? I think one thing that you'll notice here is like we're still learning kind of what we need as we continue to build this motion out. But tool syndication and tool streamlining is definitely something that would be really helpful. Being able to surface insights where reps are and where reps live on a day-to-day, week-to-week, hour-to-hour basis is really, really, really insightful. And then being able to be proactive with some of the tooling and plumbing on the back end is always going to be something that's very helpful. And as we scale, that'll be something that we also look at. And it's something that we're paying close attention to.
Nice.
Our job is we can actually, how we think about this is if we can surface and enable our reps to have higher utilization on a day-to-day basis and serve more people in fewer amount of time that it takes them, we'll be in a much better spot and be able to scale our motions drastically.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to segment out those top tier people we want to have that one-to-one interaction with and others that maybe you can add some automation in there. I think that makes a ton of sense. And you talked about sort of surfacing people for the team to talk to and these insights. And so it sounds like you have some version of PQLs today across the customer journey, but is that a term that you use internally, product qualified leads?
Yeah, it's something we're developing right now. I'd say we're still very nascent here, but it's something we're developing. But we do look at a couple different things already. I'd say we're still iterating on our understanding here, but we do look at a couple basics. For example, we look at our atomic value as tasks. So we look at task consumption as a primary signal of how active are you within a platform. We also look at multi-user activity. So we like to say, do you have an account where you've got one automation hero within the company building all of your tasks and all of your workflows for you? Or is that fairly decentralized and you've got multiple people in the organization that are using the product and building workflows for you? Third, we look at the types of kind of workflows that you're using, right? We really excel in several key verticals, despite being a horizontal product that can be used for many different areas. But we're really trying to pinpoint, hey, is this person using ABC app? Are they using a CRM? Are they connecting to kind of what we call a mission critical app? So we look at those types of insights. And then we also look at things like what actions are they taking within a product? For example, have they started a new trial recently? Have they tried to set up single sign-on? Have they tried to move to annual billing and they've gone through that process and we look at the events that are firing there, it's how we better understand what's going on there.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's all these different points for you to have a really constructive value add conversation. So it makes sense to be tracking them, like all these kind of different variables along the way and getting the team on that.
Yeah, I'd say what is the biggest learning that I've had, and I think in chatting with other kind of folks building an assist or product-led sales functions, whatever you want to call it, is that, historically, if we think about the playbook for predictable revenue, their off-work is, you've got an ICP, you've got a number of leads turn into MQL turns to SQLs, SQL turns to close. It's a fairly linear process, and I think that model works really well for certain businesses. But when you look at a horizontal product like Zapier, you look at kind of many of these horizontal products that have many kind of use case, you actually have a sea of different permutations of audiences that you can go after with really targeted clustering. And to borrow something from the hours world, one of my friends, Nick Sharma, says this a lot. You have the audience, you have the channel in which you communicate, and then you have the experiment in which so you can take that same product that you have and say, I'm going to reach marketers via email, and the experiment can be completely different than how I reach salespeople, and I reach them through in-app nudges, and I offer them a completely different kind of way of engaging. So that's something that when we think about that, we think there's infinite kind of clusters to find. And our job is really to do our best work in finding them and playing this fun game of catching them all.
Yeah. And then measuring the outcomes or the goals that you have for each of those and being able to reiterate and pivot to whatever's kind of driving the most, I would assume.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's jump into pricing a bit because this is a conversation I like to have on each of our podcast episodes, but especially knowing that this is in your wheelhouse and something you think about actively, or at least we're thinking very actively about it at Shopify. Let's, I guess, just diving in maybe on the usage-based pricing and sort of what you've seen there and maybe some changes or your overall thoughts on usage-based.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just, again, come back and understand your economic value. And I think you should really let the data guide your decision here. Just broadly speaking, I think there's more than three, but I think that there's three general models that you can consider. One is you can consider a platform fee. So Shopify, our job initially was looking from, a $299 price point all the way to a $2,000 price point. And we thought that 10Xing or, 8Xing, whatever you get on that is fairly meaningful. The second is you look at seat-based pricing. And I think that's really common in product-led sales kind of category. So pay per user, pay per seat. And I think that works really well when your product has an inherent virality to it, or it has an inherent forced collaboration aspect to it. So we know that there's a ton of productivity tools. We know there's a ton of kind of productivity suite tools. We know that there's inherently multi-user communication platforms that can't scale unless you have multiple actual users using the product. And there's a virality component to it where they get to see your product. They like, Breezy, if you send me a link to a lube, for example, I know it's lube that you're sending it over to me. And then I think the third aspect is you've got usage-based products. And these are products where they may not be inherently visible to the end user or the benefiting bystander or the other people in the organization that the tool is being used. For example, Twilio is a great example. Twilio probably powers the iMessage notification that says, hey, here's your 6-digit code to sign in. And you probably have no idea that it's Twilio. And Zapier in many different ways has multi-user activity across the board, but we also price per tasks. And we can go on in so many different examples here. So when it comes to pricing and packaging, I think it's important to not fight friction and really lean into where you're seeing traction already. Is it seat-based? Is it platform-based? Is it usage-based? Is it a combination of two? And really getting that part crystal clear in the early days.
Yeah. One of the biggest kind of, I don't know if it's a pushback, but hesitations I hear from folks on usage-based pricing is the volatility of it and how it's unpredictable, which is what we love about it, right? Because that could mean a big upside. But it is hard to measure and track on and predict revenue. What would you recommend to folks thinking in that way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is a known problem across the usage-based space, and we're not pro to this either. But I think that there's also several solutions here in terms of forecasting and offering your customers and as well as yourself some level of reliability when it comes to the account growth. Number one is there's annual quotas. So instead of moving from a monthly quota, which may have variance month over month, you can always move to an annual kind of quota. And you can say, hey, we're committing to spend up to X many API calls or X many tasks or things of that nature. And that really helps you have that level of predictability. Another model here is a consumption-based quota. You can buy X amount of credits, and once you've consumed them, you can always top up and buy more and more credits. I know Snowflake and a couple other businesses are pretty notorious for advocating for this, and it's been a massive driver of their expansion revenue. But that's another area that you can kind of start to play with pricing and packaging. The third one is layering on minimum commits when it comes to usage-based pricing. It's starting to incentivize higher usage through reduction of the cost per unit at an atomic level. So, hey, spend 1 million tasks with us or spend up to 1 million credits with us. It'll be priced at 5 cents, but from 1 million to 5 million, it'll be priced at 2.5 cents. And from 2.5 there on forth, we'll have you have reduced costs. And when you look at a net revenue retention curve there, assuming they don't churn, it has a very linear step function growth every time they consume more and more over time. And there's very little volatility where it actually drops because they're committing to a set number of tasks there.
I'm going to switch us into a different topic a little bit, but you've obviously, you've seen product-led in a couple different viewpoints already. So for companies who are maybe just getting started, right? They're in the early days they haven't scaled yet, and they're just getting started with product-led growth. What piece of advice or what would you tell them to kind of think about as they're in these early days?
Yeah, for sure. I think so funny. I was just trying to a little bit of this just before this call. I think the first question is that really ask yourself, like, hey, is my business proud to be product-led? Not all businesses can be product-led. And I think that's a clear distinction line that you have to make from the get-go. And assuming your business is product-led, I'd say treat and solve for wherever there's the most volume going through your product. So if you start to spin up self-serve in sales, this is a problem that kind of every product-led company runs into, which is, we're building out self-serve, but we're also building out sales. And when push comes to shove, you hit this inflection point where you're like, what is the CTA that I pick? Do I put contact sales and get a demo button, or do I put a try now or buy now button? That's a self-serve spot. And I think that for folks starting off with product-led, it's important to understand, hey, like, where are we really over-indexing and what is a complementary piece? At Zapier, self-serve is primary. It's a primary source of all work. We really started layering on sales later on as an incremental tool on top of our already burgeoning business. So for us, we knew that by using sales as a lever to accelerate self-serve, we would always feed those learnings and kind of content back into product, back into marketing, because we knew that's where the scale was. We knew that's where, millions of users were really going through the product. Other businesses have started sales-led, and then they've said, okay, we have all these learnings, and then we transition down to product-led. It's probably not something that we have done, but could work for other areas. So it's really important to index on, hey, is your business actually going to be product-led? And if so, are you going to give it the patience and the time for you to lean into self-serve? What it also looks like is you've got to say no to a lot of different things. For the first 8 years, you could pay us to have a sales conversation here at Zapier, but there was no one here. No one would pick up, there's no call. No one would pick up the phone. No one would hop on to you. And I think having the discipline to say, hey, go through this process. And if you can't go through this process, something is broken. So we'll try and actively measure that and scale with that is going to be really important.
What do you think is that inflection point for companies to look for? So let's say they started off in the same way that Zapier did, and they're growing this self-serve model. What do you think is that inflection point to say, okay, you know what? Not just time to bring in sales assist, because I think sometimes the justification for bringing in sales assist can be earlier, but let's bring in more of a top-down sales motion. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen companies kind of split off, and this is where this gets split in so many different flavors here, but we've seen these companies split off their products into different product lines and service lines. And we've said different kind of companies have been notorious for saying, hey, this product is going to be 100% self-serve, and this product is going to be 100% sales led. And you can make that kind of distinction. I think also just making the distinction for sales, account management, customer success is really about, hey, do we really believe the cost and the investment in adding all of these reps is either going to move the needle for us in terms of retention, in terms of incremental expansion revenue? And do we feel like that's going to outweigh drastically by a factor of 5 or 10 in terms of the cost that you incur, in terms of the headcounts and the salaries to be able to support that motion. For us, when we first started, we started seeing that this was a really profitable motion for us to run. And it was a no-brainer for us to continue to invest here. And profitability can always show up in different standpoints. It can show up in, hey, expansion revenue. It can show up in annual commits versus monthly commits, right? Buying software up front versus letting folks build on a 30-day cycle. It can also show up in the downstream retention efforts, looking at survival curves and saying, hey, 70% of our customers left by day 90, but now with an account manager, that number is only 90% or 90% of customers are sticking around with us by day 90 versus 70%. So you can measure this in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I would say it also take a top-down commitment, and I think it would take a very cross-functional decision between product marketing and sales to be able to execute on motions.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of coordination. I think product-led helps to force alignment, for better or for worse. It definitely is a forcing function for alignment across more teams. And I know we're coming up on time, so I'll be cognizant of that and just ask one final question. But you talked a little bit about sales kind of working closely with the product team. And I'd be curious to just sort of hear your thoughts on how that's worked for Zapier and how that product and sales alignment is going.
Yeah, for sure. So we're still iterating here. We're still developing our playbook. One of the things that at a bare minimum is always helpful is try and feed information back as to why folks aren't converting through the human touch kind of channel. I think that's really important. So one of the things that we did very quickly was we implemented like a close loss process that said, hey, here's a list of reasons why they're not converting, drop down. But I think it's really important there for us to really nail the aspect around the close loss process, right? So being able to be religious about documentation and being able to tag all the reasons why you're not winning a deal or why you're not moving a customer all the way to the finish line, that's really important. I think, if you want to evolve that process over time, we actually have product managers, thanks to our product ops coordinators should have gone in. We actually have product managers who follow up with customers and say, hey, I want to learn more. What happened here? What could we have done if it's a mission critical thing that's on our roadmap? What could we have done to really improve that? Really starts to spin up something like a voice of the customer program. There's some tools here that have also really helped us. A tool called grain.co, super valuable tool for us, where we are able to transcribe every single call that we have with customers. And it automatically generates both a recording as well as a auto-generated transcription. So later on, one of the things that we're also able to do is build out really quick snippets and share them into channels where product managers live and work every single day and say, hey, you're talking about improving error notifications. Here's a 15-second snippet from my call today, and really forcing that feedback with them.
Yeah. The other thing I like about the idea of product managers meeting with folks in that closed loss category as well is it leaves room for that relationship to improve over time. It shows that there's a true curiosity and want to get better as a company and fill that gap that might have been there at the time. And so that when you reconnect down the line, that sort of leaves the window open to have a discussion.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Zapier culture has really made it super easy for is we have something called the all-in support program that forces kind of every single Zapier to hop on a set number of customer-facing calls or support tickets or any other kind of customer-facing medium. And, one of the things that we have is we have a running Slack channel where it's called the Customer Ride-Along program, where all of our demos, our sales assistant, also account management demos, quarterly business reviews with some of our highest paying customers are all just on a rolling basis. And anyone at the company can just click one emoji and join those calls, and they'll actually give us feedback. They'll give the rep feedback after the call, and they'll say, hey, John, I thought that was really interesting how customer A was talking about A, B, and C. Did you know, we're working on this on the engineering roadmap, and it forces that collaboration and that cross-functional muscle.
Well, I think we're coming up on our time here. So where should people go to learn more about you and to learn about Zapier?
Yeah, well, hey, we're always hiring. So if you want to come work with us, build out this program, again, we're so early and we have so much left to build. Zapier.com/jobs is a really good spot. I'm always around. I'm happy to reach me at hi@steve.co or my email at Zapier. And I'm more than happy to talk about this area and learn from other people that are also building in this area as well.
Steve, thanks again. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And it was awesome to have you on Product-Led Revenue.
Breezy, thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Product-Led Revenue. This show is brought to you by Correlated, the first platform built for product-led revenue. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow the Product-Led Revenue podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit getcorrelated.com/podcast to get access to all of the latest episodes.